I never imagined my future would look like this.
I will protect your autonomy.
The room was quiet enough to hear the hum of the machine. Celine lay still on the examination bed, her fingers curled tightly against her palm. The gel on her stomach felt cold, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling, not the screen. She had told herself this was routine, a simple check, a way to silence the nausea and dizziness that had followed her for days. Across the room, the technician moved the wand slowly, paused, moved it again. Silence stretched. Celine turned her head slightly. Is everything all right? The technician did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained on the monitor. Her expression changed, but not in alarm. In disbelief. Mrs. Vale, she said carefully, are you aware that you're pregnant? The word struck like a physical force. Pregnant. Celine's breath caught in her throat. That's not possible. It wasn't denial. It was math. Medical reports, consultations, clear conclusions. The technician adjusted the screen. There's more, she added softly. She tilted the monitor. 2 rhythmic pulses flickered in black and white. 2 heartbeats. Steady. Strong. Celine pushed herself up slightly, her heart racing now in sync, with the sound echoing through the room. No, she whispered. There has to be a mistake. The technician shook her head gently. I'm seeing 2 viable heartbeats. Twins. The word formed silently in Celine's mind before anyone said it aloud. Twins. She pressed her lips together, fighting the wave rising in her chest. Not fear. Not doubt. Shock. 3 years earlier, doctors had looked into Calum Vale's eyes and delivered their verdict with clinical certainty. Internal injuries from the crash had left little room for possibility. Biological children were described as nearly impossible. Nearly. Statistics had spoken. Final. Definitive. Now 2 steady pulses contradicted every percentage ever printed on paper. Celine stared at the screen. At the evidence no one had prepared her for. The machine continued its quiet rhythm. Inside her body, life was forming where experts had drawn a line. And for the first time since signing a contract, she did not choose freely. Celine felt something shift. Not obligation, not duty. Hope. She reached for the printed image when the appointment ended. Her fingers trembled now, not from weakness, but from the weight of what it meant. 2 heartbeats, 2 futures, 2 answers to a question the world had already closed. The elevator ride down from the clinic felt longer than usual. The city outside moved as it always did. Cars stopped at lights. Pedestrians crossed streets. Nothing appeared different, but everything was. In a quiet office high above downtown Chicago, her husband believed fatherhood was a door that had closed forever. In her bag, she carried proof that it had never locked. And somewhere between disbelief and faith, a single truth began to take shape. Some outcomes refused to obey predictions. This was not a rumor, not speculation, not wishful thinking. It was real. 2 heartbeats. Alive. Waiting. 3 years earlier, Calum sat in a hospital office that smelled of disinfectant and restraint. 2 specialists faced him across a narrow desk. Charts glowed on a tablet between them. You've recovered well, one began. He nodded once. Recovery was measurable, quantifiable. He respected numbers. The second doctor cleared his throat. There was internal trauma during the accident. The damage significantly affects reproductive function. Calum did not blink. Be direct. The probability of biological children is extremely low. Not impossible, but close. Silence followed. He did not ask why. He had already seen the scans. He did not react outwardly. Losing the use of his legs had already taught him something important. Public emotion invites public pity, and he refused to be pitied. I understand, he said calmly. No anger, no bargaining, just acceptance of information. Later that evening, alone in his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, he reread the report. Extremely low probability. He closed the file. Children had never been central to his ambition. He had built companies, negotiated billion-dollar contracts, reshaped skylines. Still, knowing something is unlikely feels different from being told it nearly cannot happen. The board eventually raised the topic of marriage. stability, investor confidence, public reassurance. He listened. If he married, it would not be deception. He would not promise children he could not guarantee. He would not build a life on illusion. What he did not know was this: some verdicts are written in ink, others are written in pencil. The law office overlooked downtown Chicago. Celine sat at the end of a long glass table, the contract placed neatly in front of her. Her father sat beside her, silent, shoulders heavier than she had ever seen them. Across from her was Calum Vale, composed, measured, watching, not pressuring. The lawyer explained the terms again. Financial protection for her family, full autonomy, no obligation for children, separate private space, freedom to continue her career. It was structured, careful, safe. Still, it was not love. Celine scanned the final page. Her father's company was collapsing. Creditors were closing in. The home she grew up in was weeks from foreclosure. This signature would stop all of it. She looked at Calum. "I won't be expected to perform a role?" she asked. "You'll be respected," he replied evenly. "Nothing more, nothing less, no false promises, no emotional manipulation, just clarity." Celine picked up the pen. Her hands did not shake. They felt numb. She signed. Not for romance, not for status, for survival. She slid the contract forward. Calum signed after her. 2 names, 1 agreement, a future neither of them fully understood. And years later, that same agreement would stand in quiet contrast to 2 heartbeats that were never supposed to exist. "You are looking at something that was never supposed to exist." That was the only sentence Celine could think as she stared at the ultrasound image resting on the kitchen counter. 2 heartbeats, clear, undeniable. Have you ever been told your future was already decided? That a door was closed before you even reached it? Calum had been told. Clinical certainty, statistical confidence, a life adjusted around limitation. Celine had been told too, in a different way. That marriage would be strategic. That love could be postponed. That survival required sacrifice. When the world labels you incomplete, what do you do next? Do you shrink into the label? Do you build around it? Or do you quietly keep living until something challenges the verdict? Because here is the truth. This pregnancy was not part of the contract. It was not part of the board's expectations. It was not part of the medical projections. And yet, it existed. 2 steady pulses rewriting a narrative written years earlier in a hospital room. What happens when the impossible refuses to stay impossible? What happens when the man who was nearly certain he would never be a father is about to hold 2 children in his arms? What happens when a marriage that began as obligation begins to transform into something neither of them planned? This is not a story about shock. It is about identity, about dignity, about what grows when respect comes first. Because, before the headlines, before the congratulations, before the world called it extraordinary, there was a contract, there was a diagnosis, there was a choice, and everything that followed began there. Before we go back to the beginning, pause for a second. If you have ever been told something about your life was final, if you have ever watched someone be defined by what they lacked, if you believe second chances sometimes arrive quietly instead of dramatically, comment below. I believe in unexpected outcomes. And if stories about strength, dignity, and love built on respect matter to you, make sure you subscribe now. Because what you are about to witness is not just a miracle. It is a transformation. Now let's return to the moment before the ultrasound. Before the heartbeats. Before the tears. Before the world changed its tone. Let's go back to the debt. To the pressure. To the office in downtown Chicago, where a 27-year-old woman signed a contract she never imagined would become the foundation of her greatest joy. Because miracles rarely begin with celebration, they begin with compromise. And Celine Aurora's story began the day survival forced her to choose a future she did not design. Let's start there. Celine had grown up believing her father's logistics company was modest but steady. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid school fees, mortgage bills, and the quiet pride of independence. The warehouse on the south side of Chicago carried her childhood memories. She remembered stacking small labeled boxes during summer breaks, listening to delivery trucks reverse into loading bays, watching her father negotiate contracts over burnt coffee. Then the partnership happened. A larger distributor offered expansion, more routes, bigger clients, faster growth. Her father signed the agreement after weeks of persuasion. It looked promising on paper. Within a year, invoices stopped being honored. Shipments were delayed. Liability clauses surfaced. Her father's company absorbed penalties while the partner withdrew under technical protections buried in fine print. Cash flow dried up. Lines of credit were exhausted. Equipment loans went unpaid. Celine first noticed the shift in her father's posture. He stopped making eye contact at dinner. He stopped answering unknown numbers. The warehouse lost 2 employees, then 3. The final blow came quietly. A formal notice from the bank demanding full repayment of an accelerated loan. The company that had sustained their family for 2 decades collapsed in less than 12 months. The day foreclosure paperwork arrived for the family home. Her father placed the envelope on the kitchen counter without speaking. Celine picked it up. The numbers were real, brutal, unforgiving. This was no temporary setback. This was ruin, and for the first time in her life, Celine understood what it meant to be cornered by circumstances larger than hope. Debt is heavy. Legal debt is suffocating. Within weeks, certified letters began arriving daily. Notices of default, demand letters, warnings of litigation. Each envelope felt like a countdown clock ticking louder. Her father tried to negotiate extensions. Creditors were polite at first, then firm, then aggressive. One afternoon, Celine accompanied him to a meeting with an attorney representing one of the largest lenders. The office was modern and spotless, the tone transactional. The collateral clauses are enforceable, the attorney explained calmly. If repayment is not secured within 30 days, we proceed. Proceed meant lawsuits. Proceed meant asset seizure. Proceed meant public filings that would destroy any remaining business credibility. Celine sat upright, absorbing every word. Her father spoke less than usual. His voice had lost its confidence. Outside the building, he finally admitted the truth. I misjudged them, he said quietly. The failed partner had structured the agreement carefully, protecting themselves while shifting liability. Now every signature her father had placed years ago had become a trap. Legal pressure does not shout. It documents. It stamps. It files. Within days, court dates were scheduled. Collection agencies began contacting extended relatives. Neighbors whispered after receiving mistaken calls. Celine felt humiliation creep in, not because of wrongdoing, but because failure rarely stays private. Every option she researched led to the same outcome. Bankruptcy would save little. Liquidation would leave them homeless. Time was gone. And time, she realized, was the one resource her family no longer had. Celine did not blame her father, but she could see the weight crushing him. He stopped shaving regularly. He spent hours staring at spreadsheets that no longer mattered. He apologized more than necessary. For dinner being simple, for the house possibly being lost, for not protecting her future. You deserved stability, he told her one evening. She forced a smile. I have stability. It was not true. Her salary as a community art teacher covered her personal expenses, not multi-million-dollar liabilities. She lay awake at night calculating numbers she knew she could not fix. Guilt entered quietly. If she had chosen a more lucrative career, would it matter? If she had reviewed the partnership contract years earlier, could she have warned him? If she had noticed the warning signs sooner? None of those thoughts changed reality. Still, they circled her mind relentlessly. Her father had sacrificed for her education. Now she could not shield him from consequences he did not foresee. The foreclosure notice remained taped inside a kitchen cabinet, hidden but present. Every time she reached for a plate, she saw it. Debt reshapes relationships. Conversations became shorter, meals quieter, laughter rare. Celine began to understand something difficult. Love does not erase financial disaster. But perhaps sacrifice could. She did not yet know what form that sacrifice would take, only that she was prepared to make one. The proposal arrived through a mutual business contact who still respected her father. It was presented discreetly. Private meeting. Confidential terms. Celine expected another loan negotiation. Another extension attempt. Instead, she was introduced to a legal representative from Vale Infrastructure Group. The offer was precise. Calum Vale required a wife. Not for spectacle. For stability. An upcoming merger required investor reassurance. Public perception of continuity mattered. In exchange, Vale would absorb her father's outstanding debts in full. Legal actions would cease. The foreclosure would be withdrawn. Celine listened without interrupting. The contract terms were outlined carefully. Separate living spaces. No obligation for children. Freedom to maintain her career. Financial independence protected. This was not a romantic proposal. It was structured. Strategic. Contained. What does he expect emotionally? She asked. Respect, the representative answered. Nothing forced. Celine felt her pulse steady rather than race. This was not exploitation. It was negotiation. Still, the weight of it settled heavily. Marriage as solution. Marriage as transaction. Marriage as rescue. Her father refused immediately when she told him. I won't let you do that, he said. But she had already begun considering it. Because the numbers did not lie, and neither did the consequences of refusing. That night, Celine walked along Lake Michigan alone. Wind pressed against her coat. The skyline shimmered across the water. Somewhere above those buildings lived the man who had made the offer. She had researched him already. Brilliant CEO. Private. Wheelchair user after a car accident. Reportedly infertile due to internal trauma. The media speculated constantly about his legacy. She considered her own. Was she trading autonomy? Or was she exercising it? The contract did not demand affection. It did not require performance beyond public appearances. It did not threaten her independence. Yet the word forced echoed in her mind. Not because he forced her, but because circumstances did. She wanted love someday. Partnership built on emotion, not necessity. Would this close that door? Or would it open a different one? She imagined her father losing the house. Court hearings. Years of recovery from bankruptcy. His health deteriorating under stress. Then she imagined signing. Security restored. Silence replacing chaos. This was not about fantasy. It was about outcome. Her heart did not feel romantic, but it did feel responsible. And responsibility can be louder than desire. Morning light filtered through her bedroom window when Celine made her decision. She did not cry. She did not dramatize it. She listed facts. Her father's debt could not be repaid independently. Legal consequences would multiply. Waiting would worsen everything. The marriage contract guaranteed dignity. It outlined respect. It preserved her career. It did not confine her physically or emotionally. Was it ideal? No. Was it coercion? No. It was a choice under pressure. Autonomy is not always about selecting what you prefer. Sometimes it is about selecting what protects others. Celine understood something clearly in that moment. Survival does not always feel heroic. It feels pragmatic. She called the number provided by Vale's legal office. I would like to meet Mr. Vale, she said calmly. Her voice did not shake. This was not surrender. This was negotiation. And as she ended the call, she realized the next step would not be signing. It would be looking into the eyes of the man whose name could erase her family's ruin. Only then would she know whether this agreement could become something livable. Her future shifted the moment that meeting was scheduled, not because she was rescued, but because she chose to walk into it willingly. The accident happened on a highway outside Milwaukee during a late autumn storm. Calum had insisted on driving himself back from a site inspection. His security team followed in another vehicle, but he preferred independence whenever possible. Rain struck the windshield in hard, uneven sheets. Visibility narrowed. Traffic slowed. A delivery truck, several cars ahead, lost traction first. What followed lasted seconds. Metal collided. Tires screamed. Glass fractured. Calum remembered the sensation of the steering wheel jerking violently to the left. He remembered trying to correct it. He remembered the impact more than the pain. When he regained awareness, he was upside down. The cabin smelled of fuel and smoke. His legs did not respond when he tried to move them. Emergency responders extracted him carefully. In the ambulance, he asked one question. Is anyone else injured? He did not ask about himself. The surgeries were long. Internal bleeding required immediate intervention. Spinal trauma altered his mobility permanently. Months of rehabilitation followed. He learned new routines, transfers, upper body strength, wheelchair navigation, balance, patience. Physical recovery was demanding, but what surprised him most was how quickly people's tone changed around him. Voices softened, conversations shortened, eyes avoided direct contact. Caleb noticed all of it. He had built skyscrapers and negotiated billion-dollar expansions. Now people spoke to him as if fragility had replaced capability. He accepted the wheelchair. He rejected the assumption that it defined him. The accident altered his body. It did not alter his authority. Vale Infrastructure Group did not slow after the accident. If anything, expectations intensified. The company was approaching a merger that would expand operations across multiple states. Investors sought reassurance. Competitors watched closely. During a quarterly board meeting, one executive addressed the subject directly. Public perception matters, he said. Stability is market confidence. Caleb understood the implication before it was articulated. Leadership, legacy, continuity. The company needed an image of long-term strength. Marriage entered the discussion subtly at first. A visible partnership suggested permanence. Permanence reassured shareholders. Shareholders protected stock value. Your personal life reflects corporate stability, another board member added. Caleb listened without emotion. He had never prioritized marriage. His schedule left little room for it. Yet he also understood strategy. If he married, it would not be for spectacle alone. It would not be a performance. He would not parade affection for financial optics. What you're suggesting, he said calmly, is that investors prefer a married CEO. We're suggesting, the chairman clarified, that family signals continuity. Continuity, the word lingered. Caleb considered the proposition not as a romantic shift, but as structural reinforcement. If he entered marriage, it would be contractual, transparent, respectful, not decorative, not deceptive. He would not pretend to offer fatherhood if medical reality suggested otherwise. He would not sell illusion for valuation. If stability was required, he would provide it with clarity. The media did not treat his recovery with restraint. Headlines speculated openly about his future. Commentators debated succession planning. Online threads questioned whether a CEO who could not walk could sustain leadership intensity. Some articles were polite. Others were blunt. Is Vale Infrastructure prepared for a permanent adjustment at the top? The phrasing was careful, but the implication was not. More invasive commentary targeted his personal life. Would he marry? Could he have children? Was his legacy at risk? Medical privacy rarely survives wealth. Anonymous sources claimed knowledge of his prognosis. Forums dissected probabilities as if they were sports statistics. Caleb did not issue public responses. He did not engage in interviews defending his body. Instead, he expanded operations into 2 new states within a year. Revenue climbed. Infrastructure projects continued under his supervision. Results speak louder than rebuttals. Yet the speculation remained. He read one article late at night, questioning whether he was incomplete. He closed the browser without anger. Completeness is not determined by mobility, nor by reproduction. He refused to internalize commentary written by people who did not know him. Silence became his strategy. Productivity became his answer. After rehabilitation, assistants were assigned to support his daily routine. He declined most of them in private spaces. He transferred independently from chair to desk. He navigated hallways without assistance. He insisted on attending site visits in person, even if terrain required adjustment. Pity irritated him more than inconvenience. One evening, during a charity gala, a well-meaning guest placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're so brave," she said softly. Caleb held her gaze. "I'm employed," he replied evenly, "not brave." He did not view himself as inspirational for existing. He was a businessman, an engineer, a strategist. The wheelchair was a tool, not an identity. Privately, he allowed himself moments of frustration. Reaching high shelves required adaptation. Physical fatigue arrived sooner than before. But frustration is not defeat. He invested in physical training tailored to upper body strength. He modified his penthouse for efficiency rather than luxury. His sister once asked him whether he felt limited. Adjusted, he corrected her. That distinction mattered. When the board introduced the concept of marriage as strategic reinforcement, he did not reject it out of pride. He evaluated it as he would any partnership. If he entered it, the woman beside him would not be ornamental. She would be respected, and she would never be made to feel owned. Celine expected distance when she first entered his office. Instead, she found stillness. Calum dismissed his legal team before she sat down. No intermediaries remained. Just 2 chairs and a wide window overlooking the city. "Thank you for coming," he said. His tone was calm, without pressure. She studied him openly. His posture was upright, his eyes attentive. There was no trace of superiority in his expression. "I want clarity," she began. "You'll have it," he replied. She asked about expectations. Public appearances? Limited. Children? No obligation. Control over her career? Entirely hers. "What happens if this becomes uncomfortable?" She pressed. "We revise," he said. "Or we end it respectfully. No manipulation, no romantic pretense." She sensed something unexpected. Restraint. Most powerful men she had encountered filled rooms loudly. Calum did not. His presence was firm without excess. He asked about her father's company, not as leverage, but as understanding. "Debt should not destroy a family," he said quietly. The statement carried no arrogance. It carried intention. For the first time since the offer surfaced, Celine felt something other than pressure. She felt seen. The final meeting before signing occurred in the same office. Contracts were prepared. Lawyers present but silent. Before pens touched paper, Calum addressed her directly. "This arrangement exists because circumstances demand structure," he said. "But I will not treat you as an asset." Celine met his gaze steadily. "You will have your own space," he continued. "Your own decisions, your own projects. I will not dictate your friendships, your schedule, or your ambitions." She listened carefully. "I don't require affection," he added. "I require honesty." There was no desperation in his tone, no attempt to secure emotional promises, just boundaries. Then he said something that shifted the room's atmosphere entirely. "I will protect your autonomy, not your loyalty, not your obedience, your autonomy." The words settled deeply. In that moment, Celine realized this would not be a cage disguised as rescue. It would be an agreement between 2 adults under pressure. She nodded once. The lawyers resumed their procedural explanations. Contracts were signed, not with excitement, not with regret, but with mutual understanding. What the world would later call an arrangement was, at its core, an exchange rooted in dignity. And dignity, she would soon learn, is a stronger foundation than impulse. There were no grand announcements, no orchestra, no celebrity guests, no spectacle designed to trend. The ceremony took place in a private event space on the upper floor of a downtown Chicago building owned by Vail Infrastructure. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, but the room itself was simple. White florals, soft lighting, a small gathering of executives, and Celine's immediate family. The atmosphere was controlled, respectful, measured. Celine stood in a tailored ivory gown that was elegant without extravagance. She had chosen it herself, not because it felt like a dream, but because it felt appropriate. Calum waited near the officiant, his charcoal suit sharp, his wheelchair positioned with quiet confidence. He did not look diminished. He looked deliberate. When Celine reached him, their eyes met briefly. No dramatic swell of music, no whispered promises beyond the scripted vows. The officiant spoke about partnership, stability, and mutual respect, words that felt more contractual than romantic. When it was Calum's turn to speak, his voice carried clearly. "I will protect your autonomy," he said. The room remained silent. Not a single guest shifted uncomfortably. Not a single camera flash interrupted the moment. The ceremony was recorded for documentation, not publicity. Celine responded with equal clarity. "I will meet you with honesty. No exaggerated affection. No performance." When the officiant pronounced them married, applause followed politely. There was no kiss staged for effect, just a nod. a shared understanding. It felt less like a wedding and more like the signing of a solemn agreement witnessed by those who mattered. Yet as Celine stood beside her new husband, she did not feel trapped. She felt aware. The penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan was expansive, designed for efficiency rather than excess. Upon arrival after the ceremony, Celine was shown to her wing first, her own bedroom, her own sitting area, a private studio space large enough for her art planning and foundation work. The design was thoughtful, not indulgent. Wide corridors allowed for smooth mobility, adjustable counters, quiet technology integrated into walls. Calum followed shortly after. "You are not obligated to share my room," he said calmly. This arrangement should not feel imposed. She studied him. Most newly married couples navigate awkward intimacy or forced closeness. They negotiate space emotionally. Here, space had already been defined. "I appreciate that," she replied. He nodded once and turned toward his own wing. The first night passed in silence. Celine lay awake staring at the ceiling. The city lights reflected faintly across her walls. She listened for movement, for conversation, for anything that felt traditionally marital. There was none. No intrusion, no expectation. Across the penthouse, Calum remained in his own room, reviewing documents until late. Routine did not change simply because a ceremony had occurred. Their separation was not cold. It was intentional, a boundary drawn clearly from the beginning. And while Celine had feared suffocation when considering this marriage, the physical distance surprised her. It created air. Yet air can also create emptiness. In the weeks following the wedding, their interactions were polite and structured. Breakfast schedules were coordinated through brief exchanges in the kitchen. Public appearances were discussed with efficiency. Legal updates regarding her father's resolved debts were delivered without dramatics. They spoke like partners in a venture, not adversaries, not lovers. There were no arguments, but there were no shared jokes either. Celine noticed how carefully Calum measured his tone. He never raised his voice, never stepped into her space uninvited, never made decisions on her behalf. Respect can feel formal when unfamiliar. At night, she sometimes paused outside his study, hearing the faint sound of pages turning. She considered knocking, starting a conversation unrelated to logistics. She rarely did. He did not initiate either. Perhaps both feared crossing invisible lines. This was not hostility. It was restraint. Two adults adjusting to proximity without history. Celine reminded herself why she had agreed. Stability, protection, structure. Yet human hearts do not operate entirely on logic. She did not regret signing, but she wondered what this marriage would become beyond documentation. Was it meant to evolve, or remain exactly as outlined? The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was undefined, and undefined spaces often hold the most potential. Publicly, they appeared seamless. At corporate functions, Calum positioned himself confidently beside her. Celine matched his composure with calm grace. They answered questions about the merger, about future initiatives, about philanthropy. Cameras captured their images carefully. Headlines shifted tone. Vale announces marriage ahead of strategic expansion. Investors responded positively. Stability was reinforced. Stock confidence strengthened. They did not perform exaggerated affection. Their restraint, ironically, enhanced credibility. In private, however, the performance dissolved. Back at the penthouse, formal posture relaxed. Shoes were removed. Silence returned. One evening after a shareholder dinner, Celine watched him maneuver his wheelchair into the kitchen independently. He reached for a glass with steady precision, balancing efficiently. No assistant followed. No one hovered. Public perception framed him as vulnerable. Privately, he moved with disciplined control. She realized the contrast was not between strong and weak. It was between visible narrative and lived reality. The world saw a CEO adapting. She saw a man refusing dependency. The difference mattered. One rainy afternoon, Celine returned from meeting with her foundation advisors and found Calum in the living room reviewing architectural drafts. He had transferred from his chair to the sofa without assistance. The movement was deliberate, requiring upper body strength and focus. She paused unnoticed for a moment. He did not look fragile. He looked focused. When one of the rolled drafts slipped from his grasp and fell to the floor, he leaned forward carefully to retrieve it. She stepped in quietly and picked it up before he could. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she replied. There was no defensiveness in his voice, no embarrassment, just awareness. She handed him the papers. Their fingers brushed briefly. He did not pull away. He did not linger. He simply continued reviewing his work. That small moment shifted something subtle in her perception. He did not ask to be saved. He did not lean into limitation. He adjusted and proceeded. Later that evening, as Celine stood by the window watching lights ripple across Lake Michigan, she felt something she had not anticipated. Not regret, not fear, but uncertainty mixed with curiosity. This marriage was not suffocating. It was spacious, structured, unexpectedly dignified. And yet, beneath that structure, something unsettled stirred within her chest. Not dissatisfaction, not longing, but awareness that this agreement might not remain static. She turned from the window slowly. Whatever this was becoming, it had not revealed itself fully. Not yet. Marriage did not transform their schedules overnight. Calum still woke at 5:30 each morning. The soft vibration of his alarm never rang loudly. It pulsed against the bedside table instead. By 5:45, he was already reviewing infrastructure reports from his tablet, annotating figures with a stylus, sending concise emails before sunrise. Celine noticed this pattern within the first week. She often woke later, drifting into the kitchen around 7. The first time she found him there, he was transferring a coffee mug from the counter to the dining table with steady precision. "You're up early," she said. "Routine keeps things efficient," he replied. It wasn't a boast. It was a philosophy. Over time, their mornings developed rhythm. She began brewing coffee before he reached the kitchen. He adjusted cabinet shelves to make shared access easier without commenting on it. They learned each other's silences. Friday evenings were reserved for a video call with his younger sister in Seattle. Celine once passed the study door and heard him laugh softly. Not a corporate laugh. A real one. On weekends, she visited local schools connected to her art classes. He asked brief but sincere questions about her students. Names, ages, what they liked to paint. Proximity replaced abstraction. They were no longer a CEO and a contractual wife. They were two individuals sharing space long enough to notice habits. And habits, Celine realized, reveal character more honestly than speeches ever could. The moment happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Celine was organizing supply lists for a weekend workshop when she heard a sharp clatter echo down the hallway. It wasn't loud enough to signal danger, but it wasn't ordinary either. She stepped out of her studio and followed the sound. Calum had just transferred from his wheelchair to the sofa in the living room. A stack of large architectural blueprints lay scattered across the hardwood floor. One had unrolled halfway, stretching awkwardly beneath the coffee table. For a fraction of a second, frustration crossed his face. Not self-pity, not helplessness, just irritation at interruption. "I've got it," he said before she could speak. Celine crouched anyway, smoothing the curled edges carefully. "I know you do," she replied evenly, "but I'm already here." He paused. The distinction mattered. She wasn't rescuing him. She was participating. He watched her gather the pages in order, aligning corners with careful precision. She did not move quickly out of awkwardness. She moved calmly, as if this were a normal exchange. "Most people hesitate," he said quietly. "About what? Whether helping offends me." She looked up. "Does it? Only if it's offered with pity." She handed him the stack. "This isn't pity." Their fingers brushed again. The room did not shift dramatically, but something settled. Later that evening, she realized the moment had altered her perception further. He did not need saving. He valued partnership. And partnership, she was beginning to understand, required presence more than perfection. Until that night, most of their meals had been functional, shared, but brief. That evening, neither had outside obligations. The penthouse felt unusually quiet. Rain tapped lightly against the glass walls overlooking Lake Michigan. Celine carried 2 plates to the long marble dining table. "No assistance?" he asked. "I told them we'd manage." He studied her briefly, then nodded. They ate without rushing. "What did you paint today?" he asked after a few minutes. It wasn't small talk. She described a mural concept her students were developing, bright colors layered over gray city blocks. She spoke longer than she intended. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked, "What would you build if funding weren't an issue?" The question caught her off guard. "A foundation," she answered slowly. "One focused on underfunded public schools. Art programs disappear first when budgets tighten. I want to protect them." He leaned back slightly. "Scale? Start in Chicago, expand if it works. And sustainability?" She smiled faintly. "You're analyzing my dream like a project proposal. All ideas deserve structure," he replied. Silence followed, but it was no longer distant. It felt engaged. For the first time, they weren't discussing contracts or logistics. They were discussing ambition. That night, when Celine returned to her room, she realized something unexpected. She had enjoyed dinner, not because it was romantic, but because it felt mutual. Over the next week, Celine drafted a basic outline for her foundation, mission statement, initial budget projections, pilot school partnerships. She didn't show it to him immediately. The dream felt personal, fragile. One afternoon, he found her reviewing numbers at the kitchen island. "You're calculating outreach costs," he observed. She exhaled softly. "It's more complicated than I expected. Everything scalable is—" He asked to see the document. Reluctantly, she handed it over. He reviewed it carefully, not dismissively. He made notes in the margins about grant cycles, corporate sponsorship structures, long-term funding mechanisms. "You've built the heart," he said. "Now build the spine." She frowned slightly. "Meaning?" "Governance, accountability, longevity." They spent the next hour discussing frameworks, legal structures, reporting requirements. It did not feel like a husband taking control. It felt like a strategist refining a blueprint. When he finished, he returned the tablet. "You can do this," he said simply. No flattery, just assessment. For the first time since the marriage began, Celine felt not just respected, but supported. 2 weeks later, Celine received an email from a legal consultant affiliated with Vail Foundation, a sponsorship proposal. Full seed funding for her pilot program, no press release attached, no branding requirement, no demand for public acknowledgement. She walked into his study holding the document. "You didn't tell me," she said. He looked up calmly. "You didn't ask. This is significant funding. It's structured investment," he corrected. "Your plan is viable." She studied him carefully. "You're not using this as leverage?" "No. Not for public image? Not unless you want it public." The simplicity unsettled her. "Why?" She pressed. He answered without hesitation. "Because you want to build something that matters." That was all. Not because it strengthened the company. Not because it strengthened their marriage. Because it mattered to her. The same words she had used when gathering his blueprints surfaced in her mind. "I want to." Choice, not obligation. That distinction deepened everything. Something subtle changed after the funding. They still maintained separate rooms, still honored boundaries, still moved carefully around unspoken lines. But there was warmth now. In the kitchen, their conversations lingered. In the evenings, they shared updates about their days without prompting. When she presented her foundation proposal to potential partners, he asked how it went and listened fully to her answer. One night, as they sat side by side reviewing separate documents, Celine glanced at him quietly. This marriage had begun as necessity, yet it did not feel transactional anymore. It felt deliberate. And here is the question for you. Would you choose respect over passion at the beginning of a marriage? Would you build on dignity first, trusting that feeling might follow? Comment below. I want to know your honest answer. Because in this penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, something important was unfolding. Not fireworks, not dramatic confession, but foundation. Respect was replacing obligation, support was replacing distance, and slowly, without announcement, two strangers who had signed a contract were beginning to see each other clearly. Not as rescuer and rescued, not as CEO and beneficiary, but as equals navigating proximity with care. Celine did not call it love. Not yet. But she no longer felt unsettled. She felt aware that something steady was forming. And steady, she was beginning to realize, can be more powerful than sudden. The storm arrived without warning. By late evening, the skyline beyond the penthouse windows had disappeared behind sheets of rain. Thunder rolled across Lake Michigan, low and heavy, vibrating faintly through the glass walls. Celine had been reviewing Foundation emails when the lights flickered once, then steadied. She rose from her desk and walked into the living room. The space felt larger at night, the city muted, the storm pressing against the windows like a force demanding attention. Calum was already there. He sat near the glass, his wheelchair angled toward the view. The room lights were dimmed, leaving only the glow of lightning to illuminate his profile in brief flashes. "You're still awake," she said softly. "I don't sleep well in weather like this." The answer was simple, controlled, but something in his tone felt different. Not distant, not cold, tight. Thunder cracked sharply overhead. The sound echoed across the water. Celine stepped closer, stopping beside him rather than across the room. "You don't like storms?" she asked gently. He didn't respond immediately. Another flash of lightning lit the sky white for a split second. The reflection in the glass revealed his jaw tightening. "The accident happened during a storm," he said at last. The words hung in the air between them. Until that moment, he had never mentioned the night directly. The board had discussed it. The media had speculated. Medical reports had detailed injuries. But he had remained silent. Now the storm outside had unlocked something memory kept sealed. Celine did not sit yet. She simply stayed. Presence first. Questions later. Rain struck harder against the glass. Calum exhaled slowly before continuing. "It was late. Visibility dropped faster than expected. A truck ahead of me hydroplaned. I tried to correct. The car spun." His voice remained even, but his eyes were fixed beyond the storm, not inside the room. "There's a moment," he added quietly, "between impact and silence. It stretches. You know something irreversible is happening, but you can't stop it." Celine lowered herself into the chair beside him. He did not look at her. "Not yet. I remember trying to move my legs," he continued. "They didn't respond. That was when I understood something had changed. The confession was not dramatic. It was factual. But facts can carry weight. I asked the paramedic whether anyone else was hurt," he said. "I didn't ask about myself." "Why?" Celine asked softly. "Control," he replied. "If I focused on others, I didn't have to process what I'd lost." Another thunderclap followed. This time he flinched slightly. Not visibly enough for strangers to notice, but enough for her. "You rebuilt everything," she said. "I rebuilt what I could," he corrected. There was no self-pity in his tone, only acknowledgement. The company, the structure, my routine, those were within reach. "And the rest?" she asked carefully. He finally turned toward her. "The rest required acceptance." The storm outside continued. Inside, something more powerful was unfolding. For the first time since their wedding, he was not the composed CEO. He was a man remembering impact. Silence lingered before Celine spoke again. "The doctors were clear," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "Internal trauma reduced the probability of biological children to nearly nothing." He didn't soften the statement. He didn't hide behind percentages. "They said not impossible," she replied quietly. "They said unlikely enough to plan otherwise." His gaze dropped briefly to his hands resting on the armrests. "I made peace with it," he continued. "Or I convinced myself I did." Celine felt her chest tighten. "You think that makes you incomplete?" she asked. "No." The answer was immediate. "But it changes expectation." He looked at her fully now. "When the board suggested marriage, I made one decision. I would never promise something I could not deliver. If children never happened, I would not allow my wife to feel misled." His voice held no bitterness, only resolve. "I didn't marry you for children," Celine said carefully. "I know. And I didn't marry you only because of debt." That caught his attention. "Then why?" he asked. She hesitated. "Because you treated me like I had choice." The storm softened slightly outside, rain now steady instead of violent. "For someone who lost physical control," she continued, "you never tried to control me." His expression shifted subtly. Not pride. Recognition. Lightning flickered again, softer now. I don't fear storms, Calum admitted after a pause. I fear repetition. Celine turned toward him fully. Repetition of what? Losing control. The admission was quiet, almost reluctant. In business, I calculate risk. I prepare contingencies. I manage outcomes. That night, none of it mattered. He inhaled slowly. When doctors told me about fertility, it felt like another variable removed from my control. Celine listened without interrupting. Everyone expects resilience, he continued. Strength, adaptation. I deliver it publicly. And privately? She asked. Privately, he said. I question whether limitation will define my future. The honesty surprised her. He had never framed himself as uncertain before. You rebuilt your future, she said. I redesigned it. The distinction was subtle. She reached for his hand instinctively this time. Not to reassure him. Not to rescue him. Just to close distance. He did not withdraw. His fingers tightened gently around hers. Not desperate. Not possessive. Just present. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside had nearly passed. Inside, something deeper had shifted. The air felt different now. Lighter. Not because the storm ended, but because silence no longer carried tension. Celine did not remove her hand. Instead, she moved slightly closer. You're not defined by what doctors predicted, she said softly. And you're not defined by a contract, he replied. Their eyes held longer this time. No performance, no calculation, just awareness. He raised his free hand slowly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. The gesture was careful, giving her time to pull back if she wished. She didn't. The distance between them closed gradually, without urgency. When his lips met hers, it was not sudden. It was deliberate. The kiss was gentle at first, testing unspoken permission. When she responded, it deepened slightly, not with hunger, but with recognition. This was not obligation. This was choice. He pulled back first, searching her expression. Are you certain? He asked quietly. Yes, she answered. No pressure, no demand, just two people stepping beyond structure into connection. That night, they did not retreat to separate wings immediately. They remained seated together, hands intertwined, speaking softly about nothing urgent. The agreement that had defined their marriage began dissolving at the edges. What replaced it was not dramatic. It was steady. Respect had already laid the foundation. Now connection had begun to build upon it. Nothing shifted overnight. There was no grand conversation labeling what had changed. No moment where one of them stood in the center of the living room and declared certainty. Instead, the transformation moved quietly, like light gradually filling a room at sunrise. After the storm conversation, they did not return to separate routines as before. They adjusted, almost instinctively. Celine found herself lingering in shared spaces longer. Calum closed his study door earlier in the evenings. They began speaking about matters beyond logistics. He asked about her childhood, about the warehouse she once played in, while her father managed shipments. She described the smell of cardboard and oil, the rhythm of forklifts moving in and out. He listened, not to respond, but to understand. She asked about his first major construction contract, long before the accident. He explained how he had negotiated aggressively despite being underestimated because of his age. There was pride in his voice, but also memory. Their conversations developed depth. They disagreed occasionally, about funding strategies, about how quickly her foundation should expand, but even disagreement felt constructive. No raised voices. No retreat into silence. Emotional growth does not always announce itself. Sometimes, it reveals itself in comfort. Celine noticed she no longer measured her words around him. She did not filter ideas to appear impressive or agreeable. She spoke freely. Calum, in turn, allowed pauses, allowed reflection, allowed himself to share thoughts not designed for boardrooms. What had begun as structured partnership was becoming something organic. Not sudden, not overwhelming, just steadily human. The mornings changed first. Previously, Celine would wake to an already active household. Calum would be reviewing reports alone, coffee prepared, day outlined. Now she began setting her alarm earlier. The first time she joined him at the kitchen counter before sunrise, he glanced at the clock. You don't have to adjust your routine, he said. I'm not adjusting, she replied lightly. I'm joining. They stood side by side preparing breakfast without formality. She cracked eggs while he poured coffee, the kitchen filled with the quiet sounds of movement instead of distance. On certain mornings, they moved to the balcony overlooking the lake. Wind carried a chill, but neither retreated quickly. They spoke about simple things: weather, upcoming meetings, her students' progress. There was something grounding about those early hours. No staff present, no public image to maintain, just two people sharing quiet before the city demanded their attention. One morning, Celine reached for his mug instinctively when it sat too close to the counter's edge. He noticed. Thank you, he said simply. She smiled. It's reflex. He studied her briefly, as if recognizing the significance of something small. Shared mornings created rhythm, and rhythm builds familiarity. Without dramatic declarations, their lives were aligning. Affection did not arrive in sweeping gestures. It arrived in details, a hand resting briefly at the small of her back as she moved past him in the hallway, her fingers brushing his shoulder when handing him documents, the subtle adjustment of his chair to sit closer rather than across from her during dinner. One afternoon, as she reviewed art proposals on the living room floor, he maneuvered beside her without speaking. He leaned slightly to observe the designs, his arm grazing hers. Neither pulled away. Physical closeness had once been carefully measured. Now it felt unforced. The first time she kissed him in daylight, it was in the kitchen after he corrected a calculation error in her budget spreadsheet. She laughed at herself. He shook his head lightly. You underestimate your precision, he said. She stepped closer and pressed a soft kiss to his lips. It lasted only seconds, but it carried intention. He responded not with surprise, but with warmth. There was no urgency in their touch, no attempt to prove anything, just acknowledgement of connection. Their physical interactions mirrored their emotional pace, gradual, considerate, mutual, and in that gradual closeness, Celine realized something quietly powerful. She no longer felt like a guest in his life. She felt included. There was no night where candles were lit, and words like forever filled the room. They did not mark the shift with a formal conversation. In fact, if asked when their marriage became real, neither might have been able to provide a date. One evening, after attending a corporate dinner, they returned home earlier than expected. The event had required polite smiles and structured answers. Inside the penthouse, heels were removed, jackets set aside. Celine leaned against the kitchen counter. Do you ever regret this? She asked quietly. The merger? He replied. The marriage. He considered the question carefully. No, he said at last. She studied him, searching for qualification. There are variables, he added, but regret isn't one of them. She nodded slowly. I don't regret it either. That was all. No proclamation of love, no grand vow, but something settled firmly between them in that exchange. Regret would have meant miscalculation. Absence of regret meant acceptance. Acceptance allowed growth. They did not need dramatic affirmation. Their consistency spoke louder. Trust does not appear suddenly. It accumulates. Celine noticed it when she began leaving her studio door open while working late. Calum noticed it when she handed him foundation contracts without hesitation, confident he would advise without control. He trusted her judgment in public settings. She trusted his steadiness during uncertainty. One afternoon, she received a call about a delayed grant disbursement. Her frustration surfaced immediately. I should have anticipated this, she muttered. He listened. You can't predict every delay, he said calmly. Adapt. There was no criticism in his tone, only reassurance. That night, she moved her belongings gradually from her separate wing into his room. Not ceremoniously, not announced. She simply carried a stack of books down the hallway and placed them on his shelf. He noticed. You're relocating? He asked lightly. Only if that's all right. It is. No further discussion was required. Trust had built quietly through actions rather than promises. They began sleeping in the same room without commentary, without redefining the agreement aloud. It felt natural. Love, Celine realized, does not always demand introduction. Sometimes it develops through reliability, through shared mornings, through steady presence, and through the absence of pressure. What they were building was not loud, but it was durable. The first sign was exhaustion, not the kind that follows long workdays or foundation meetings. This felt heavier, persistent. Celine would wake after a full night's sleep and still feel drained by mid-morning. She blamed it on expansion stress. The pilot arts program had begun gaining traction. More schools were requesting partnerships. Emails multiplied daily. Then came the dizziness. Once in the kitchen, once while presenting to a group of educators. The room tilted slightly before correcting itself. She steadied her hand against a table and kept speaking, refusing to alarm anyone. Nausea followed quietly. She avoided mentioning it to Calum at first. He had been preparing for a major infrastructure presentation tied to the merger. She didn't want to introduce distraction over something minor. It's probably stress, she told herself, but stress had never altered her body this way. Her appetite shifted unexpectedly. Certain foods repelled her. Coffee, once comforting in the mornings they shared, suddenly felt unbearable. One afternoon, she paused in her studio and pressed a hand to her abdomen. Her mind rejected the possibility instantly. It wasn't logical. Doctors had been clear. Statistics had been repeated. Still, her body did not align with logic. After another wave of nausea forced her to sit down mid-conversation with a school administrator, she made the appointment. Quietly, without telling him, not because she feared his reaction, but because she feared raising hope where certainty had once closed the door. The clinic felt impersonal. Celine sat in the waiting room reviewing foundation notes on her tablet, pretending her visit was routine. Her heart beat faster than usual, but she masked it beneath composure. When the nurse called her name, she stood carefully, as if sudden movement might confirm suspicion. Inside the examination room, she avoided speculation. "What brings you in?" the doctor asked. "Persistent nausea, fatigue, lightheadedness." The doctor nodded and began routine checks. Blood pressure, temperature, basic questions. "Any possibility you could be pregnant?" The question landed softly. Celine hesitated before answering. "The probability is extremely low," she said carefully. "That wasn't my question," the doctor replied gently. Celine inhaled. "Yes. There's a possibility." Tests were ordered quickly. Waiting is different when outcomes feel impossible. Her mind raced through practical consequences rather than celebration. What if it's false hope? What if I tell him and it's wrong? What if this creates emotional ground we cannot stand on? She thought of the hospital room where Calum had been told his chances were nearly non-existent. She thought of the quiet way he had accepted that. Could she bear reopening that wound? Fear did not come from pregnancy. It came from expectation. Expectation had been removed from their marriage early. Reintroducing it felt dangerous. Still, she waited, hands folded tightly in her lap. The technician dimmed the room lights. The machine hummed softly as gel was applied to Celine's abdomen. The cold sensation startled her briefly, grounding her in the moment. "Just relax," the technician said. Relaxation felt impossible. The wand moved slowly across her stomach. The monitor flickered in grayscale patterns Celine could not interpret. Seconds passed. Then the technician's movements slowed. She adjusted the angle slightly. Silence filled the room. Celine's pulse accelerated. "Is something wrong?" she asked. The technician leaned closer to the screen, then looked at her. "Mrs. Vale, are you aware that you're pregnant?" The words suspended time. Celine's breath caught sharply. "That can't be correct," she whispered. The technician rotated the screen toward her. "There's more." A faint rhythmic sound filled the room. Then another, 2 distinct pulses. "Those are heartbeats," the technician said gently. "2." Celine's eyes fixed on the flickering images. Her mind refused to process the information. "Twins?" she asked faintly. "Yes." The room felt smaller. 2 heartbeats where there should have been none. Medical certainty had left no room for this outcome. Yet there it was. Clear, alive, strong. And in that quiet, dim room, every prediction that had once felt immovable began to fracture. Celine sat upright slowly, staring at the printout placed in her hands. 2 small forms, 2 steady rhythms, no ambiguity. She felt tears gather before she realized she was crying. Not from fear, from disbelief. From relief. From awe. The doctor confirmed viability. Measurements aligned with early-stage development. No immediate complications. It was real. There was no medical error. No misread result. The impossible had occurred. Celine pressed her hand over her mouth, laughter and sobs mixing unexpectedly. All those careful boundaries, all those statistics. And now 2 lives quietly rewriting everything. Pause for a moment. Comment below if you've ever seen life prove experts wrong. Because this wasn't optimism. This wasn't denial. This was evidence. 2 heartbeats where there should have been silence. And somewhere in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, a man who had rebuilt everything except this part of his future had no idea his life had just shifted permanently. Celine folded the ultrasound image carefully. She needed to tell him. But first, she needed to steady herself. Chicago traffic blurred past her windshield as she drove home. She kept glancing at the ultrasound image resting on the passenger seat. 2 heartbeats. Her thoughts collided. How will he react? Will he believe it? Will he fear disappointment if something changes? She imagined walking into the penthouse, placing the image in front of him, watching his expression shift. Part of her feared overwhelming him. Another part feared underplaying it. This wasn't just pregnancy. It was restoration. It was possibility returning to a place where it had been removed clinically and quietly. The skyline rose ahead as she approached downtown. Her hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. She had entered this marriage to save her father. Now she carried something that could redefine Calum. Not because fatherhood completed him, but because choice had replaced limitation. As she parked and stepped out of the car, the city felt unchanged. Yet she knew nothing was the same. She pressed the elevator button and watched the numbers rise. With each floor, her heartbeat aligned with the memory of the 2 she had heard earlier. Strong, certain, alive. Calum was seated at the dining table reviewing merger documents when she entered. He noticed immediately. "You're pale," he said, setting his tablet aside. "What happened?" Celine did not speak at first. She walked toward him slowly and placed the ultrasound image on the table. He glanced down, confused. His eyes moved across the image once, then again. "This," he began. She nodded. "Yes." Silence filled the room. He looked at her as if searching for clarification. "It's real," she said softly. They confirmed it. He looked back at the image. His composure, so carefully maintained for years, fractured visibly. His hands trembled. "Is this accurate?" he asked, voice unsteady. "Yes." He inhaled sharply, pressing his hand against his chest as if steadying his own heartbeat. "I thought," he started, then stopped. His eyes filled. For the first time since she had known him, emotion overtook restraint. "I thought that part of my life was closed," he whispered. Celine moved closer, kneeling beside him. "It isn't." He reached for her face carefully, almost reverently. 2 heartbeats, where there should have been none. He lowered his forehead to hers. And in that quiet dining room, the man who had accepted limitation with discipline allowed himself to feel something he had long denied. Hope. Not projected, not calculated. Hope that arrived unannounced and refused to be dismissed. The news did not remain private for long. They had intended to wait until the 2nd trimester before sharing anything publicly. But in a city where powerful names travel quickly, privacy is fragile. A nurse recognized Celine's surname during a follow-up appointment. A staff member mentioned it casually to someone connected to a business journalist. Within 48 hours, speculation surfaced online. Sources close to Vale suggest unexpected pregnancy. Comment sections ignited. Analysts questioned timelines. Commentators revisited past interviews where Calum had acknowledged medical uncertainty. Some congratulated. Others doubted. Television segments debated whether it was a miracle or a misdiagnosis. Celine watched none of it. Calum read exactly one article before closing his laptop. "We don't owe them explanation," he said calmly. Still, the headlines multiplied. Photos of them leaving the penthouse circulated. Stock images of hospitals accompanied exaggerated captions. Online forums dissected fertility statistics as if they were public property. For years, the media had framed him around limitation. Now they framed him around surprise. Both missed the point. This was not spectacle. It was personal. Celine felt protective for the first time, not of herself, but of the life growing inside her. She refused interviews, declined statements, allowed their communications team to release a brief confirmation. Yes, we are expecting. We are grateful. Nothing more. Public shock was loud, but inside their home, silence held greater meaning. The next board meeting felt different. Where once there had been subtle concern about legacy, now there was visible relief. Investors had reacted positively. Stability had strengthened further. Congratulations, the chairman began, smiling more openly than usual. Several members echoed similar sentiments. Calum acknowledged them briefly, but did not indulge extended discussion. What caught his attention was not their congratulations. It was their shift. The same individuals who once questioned long-term continuity now spoke confidently about generational leadership. Identity, he realized, had always been external in their eyes. Defined by optics, now fatherhood reshaped perception. After the meeting, one board member lingered. "This changes everything," he said. "No," Calum replied evenly. "It changes nothing about performance." The man paused, then nodded slowly. Later that evening, Celine asked him how the meeting went. "They're pleased," he answered. "Are you?" she asked. He looked at her thoughtfully. "I am," he said, "but not because of them." He refused to allow fatherhood to become corporate currency. It would remain personal, and in that quiet refusal, his authority deepened. The initial ultrasound had confirmed viability. Still, specialists requested additional evaluations given prior medical conclusions. Calum attended every appointment. He listened carefully as doctors reviewed updated scans. Some expressed cautious amazement. Others used clinical language to explain that rare does not mean impossible. "It appears the prior trauma did not eliminate function entirely," one specialist clarified. "Probability was low, not zero." Calum absorbed the explanation without resentment. "Low was accurate," he said calmly. "Zero was assumed." Further testing confirmed healthy development. 2 distinct heartbeats continued steadily. No abnormalities detected. Celine squeezed his hand during one appointment as the sound filled the room again. This time, he did not hold back his reaction. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the rhythm settle within him. Medical retesting provided clarity, but it did not define the moment. The truth had already been heard. What mattered now was not the correction of data. It was the acceptance of possibility. When they left the clinic, Calum exhaled slowly. "I'm glad we didn't allow statistics to dictate expectation entirely," he said. Celine smiled. Neither did life. Fatherhood altered something internal, not his leadership style, not his schedule entirely, but his perception of himself. For years he had restructured his identity around adaptation, mobility adjustments, strategic efficiency, emotional restraint. Now he reconsidered those frameworks. He began physical training sessions again, increasing endurance and upper body strength, not to prove capability, but to prepare for holding children longer without fatigue. He reviewed architectural plans for upcoming projects with different questions. Are these buildings accessible? Are they inclusive? He noticed details he had once delegated. Why the sudden focus? A project manager asked during one site review. Perspective, he replied. At home, he spent more time researching early childhood development than stock projections. He did not treat fatherhood as compensation for prior limitation. He treated it as expansion. One evening, Celine found him reviewing nursery design layouts on his tablet. "You're analyzing cribs the way you analyze bridges," she teased gently. "All structures require stability," he answered. There was humor in his tone. And warmth. He was not redefining himself through fatherhood. He was integrating it. They chose to convert a section of the penthouse previously used as a guest suite into a nursery. Calum insisted on participating in every design choice. Lowered shelving for accessibility, wider pathways between furniture, adjustable lighting, neutral tones, softened by vibrant artwork Celine selected from her foundation's student projects. "It should feel lived in," she said. "It will," he replied. They debated practicalities. 2 cribs placed parallel. A shared reading corner. Storage positioned within reach for both of them. At one point, Celine watched him measure spacing carefully with a tape tool, adjusting angles with precision. "You don't have to handle everything," she said. "I want to," he answered simply. The same words that had once marked small moments between them now carried deeper meaning. The nursery became symbol rather than announcement, not of miracle, but of preparation, of intention. 2 small name plaques remained blank on the wall, waiting. Celine ran her hand over her growing abdomen as they stood in the doorway together. "We built this carefully," she said. "As we build everything," he replied. With public reaction stabilizing and medical confirmation secure, their household shifted into quieter focus. They stopped checking headlines entirely. They stopped discussing probabilities. Instead, they discussed schedules, parenting philosophies, how to balance corporate leadership with presence at home. One evening, Celine asked him directly, "Were you afraid?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Of what?" "Of wanting something I thought I couldn't have." The honesty felt grounding. "And now?" she asked. "Now I want it fully. No guarded phrasing. No guarded phrasing. No emotional distance. Just maturity." Celine realized that the greatest transformation was not biological. It was psychological. For years, Calum had carried limitation as neutral fact. Now he carried possibility, without arrogance. Identity beyond limitation. That was what this season represented. Not proving anyone wrong. Not rewriting public narrative. But redefining self-perception. They were no longer navigating a contract. They were preparing for parenthood. And as they stood together in the nursery one quiet evening, city lights stretching beyond their windows, Celine understood something clearly. The world may have been shocked, but the real change had occurred in private, in how he saw himself, in how they saw each other, and in the steady way they chose to step forward, together. The 3rd trimester began with caution. At first, the doctors described it as routine monitoring. Twin pregnancies required closer observation, increased rest, reduced stress, more frequent appointments. Celine adjusted willingly. She reduced foundation travel, delegated meetings, conducted virtual check-ins from the penthouse instead of visiting schools in person. Still, her body felt heavier than expected. Swelling appeared earlier than projected. Fatigue returned in a deeper form. During one scheduled appointment, the specialist's expression shifted slightly while reviewing measurements. "Baby A is developing well," he said. "Baby B is slightly smaller than expected." The word slightly lingered. It was not alarm, but it was enough. They scheduled additional scans. Back home, Celine sat quietly in the nursery, fingers resting against her abdomen. She felt movement, soft kicks and shifting weight, proof that life continued steadily. Calum watched her carefully, though he did not overwhelm her with questions. "What did the doctor say?" he asked that evening. "Monitoring," she replied. He nodded. Monitoring meant vigilance. Monitoring meant risk was not absent. Celine did not panic. She had carried the pregnancy with gratitude, but she had not allowed herself fantasy. Still, the thought entered her mind, uninvited. What if this changes? She did not speak the fear aloud. Not yet. But something had shifted. The pregnancy was no longer purely miraculous. It was fragile. And fragility demands attention. 2 weeks later, the monitoring escalated. During a routine scan, baby B's movement appeared less active than before. The doctor recommended brief hospitalization for observation. "It's precautionary," he assured them. Precaution felt heavier in a hospital setting. Celine was admitted that afternoon. Machines surrounded her bed. Monitors tracked heart rates. Nurses adjusted straps and sensors carefully across her abdomen. The room was clean, controlled, clinical. Calum positioned himself beside her without hesitation. He declined the chair offered by a nurse and adjusted his wheelchair closer to the bed. He asked measured questions. "What is the current heart rate variability? Is there measurable distress?" The doctor responded with calm professionalism. "Both heartbeats are present. We want to observe patterns overnight." Overnight. The word carried weight. As evening approached, hospital lights dimmed slightly, but rest did not follow. Celine stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic sounds of monitoring equipment. Every fluctuation felt amplified. Every pause felt extended. Calum remained alert, eyes tracking the digital displays even when she closed hers. He did not express alarm, but his hand never left hers. The room held tension, not dramatic, but steady, measured, waiting. Strength does not always require loud reassurance. That night, Calum demonstrated a different kind. When nurses entered to adjust monitors, he moved efficiently aside without complaint. When doctors updated them with cautious optimism, he absorbed the information without projecting fear. He kept conversation grounded. "Tell me about the mural your students finished," he said at one point. Celine smiled faintly, understanding his intention. He was redirecting her focus gently, preventing anxiety from overtaking logic. He requested data calmly when readings shifted slightly. "Is that within acceptable range?" "Yes," the nurse replied. He nodded. No escalation, no visible panic. But when Celine drifted into light sleep briefly, he remained awake, watching the monitors with focused intensity. His strength was not denial. It was composure. He could not control biological processes, but he could control his presence. He leaned closer at one point and whispered quietly, "We're here. That's what matters. Not promises of guaranteed outcome, not declarations of certainty, just commitment." And in that small, controlled room, Celine realized that resilience had become more than adaptation. It had become protection. Despite reassurances, fear crept in silently. Celine felt it most when the room quieted and machines hummed softly without interruption. She imagined walking out of the hospital alone, imagined explaining to reporters, to Foundation staff, to herself. She did not voice these thoughts, but her grip tightened around his hand unconsciously. "I'm scared," she admitted finally, barely above a whisper. He turned toward her fully. "So am I," he replied. The honesty surprised her. "You are?" she asked. "Yes." No elaboration, no attempt to appear invulnerable. He did not minimize the risk. He did not overstate it either. He simply acknowledged reality. "I don't fear disappointment," he added quietly. "I fear your pain." Her eyes filled. This was not about his identity, not about proving doctors wrong. It was about her, about their children, about what they had allowed themselves to hope for. Fear, she realized, was not weakness. It was attachment, and attachment meant something precious existed. They lay there together in silence, monitors tracing quiet rhythms, each processing the possibility of loss without dramatizing it. Deep stakes. No spectacle, just the awareness that love increases vulnerability. By morning, the reading stabilized. Baby B's movement improved. Heart rates remained consistent. Doctors confirmed no immediate intervention was required, though continued observation would remain necessary. Relief entered slowly, not explosively. Celine exhaled deeply for what felt like the first time in hours. Calum closed his eyes briefly, head bowing in silent gratitude. When discharge paperwork was prepared later that afternoon, the doctor reminded them again. Rest, reduced activity. "We're optimistic." Optimistic. A word measured carefully. Back in the penthouse that evening, Celine sat on the edge of their bed, while Calum positioned himself beside her. "I don't need perfection," she said softly. "I just need presence." "You have it," he answered. She looked at him fully. "No matter what happens," she continued, "this is not about biology proving anything." "I know," he replied. "It's about us." He reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "Then we stay focused on that." There was no dramatic embrace. No grand vow, just reaffirmation. They had entered marriage through necessity. They had embraced pregnancy through surprise. Now they were navigating uncertainty through maturity. Fragility did not undo them. It clarified what mattered. And as Celine rested that night in their shared room, listening not to machines but to steady breathing beside her, she understood something with certainty. Whatever the outcome, they were no longer defined by limitation. They were defined by how they showed up when stakes were real. Labor began before sunrise. Celine woke to a deep, steady tightening across her abdomen. Not sharp, not chaotic, rhythmic. She sat upright slowly, measuring the sensation. Another contraction followed. "Calum," she said quietly. He was awake instantly. "Is it time?" he asked, already reaching for his phone to alert the medical team they had prepared in advance. She nodded. The drive to the hospital felt focused rather than frantic. The city streets were still, early light stretching across Lake Michigan. Inside the car, Celine breathed through each contraction while Caleb kept his tone steady. "You're doing well," he said calmly. "Stay with the rhythm." At the hospital, everything moved efficiently. Doctors had anticipated early delivery due to twins. Nurses positioned monitors. Specialists reviewed charts. Pain intensified gradually. Celine gripped his hand firmly. He remained beside her throughout every contraction, offering measured reassurance rather than exaggerated comfort. "You're strong," he told her. "I don't feel strong," she replied between breaths. "You are." Hours passed. When the first cry filled the delivery room, the sound cut through everything. A boy, healthy, loud, alive. Moments later, another cry followed. A girl. The doctors confirmed stable vitals for both. Celine collapsed back against the pillow, tears sliding silently down her temples. It wasn't dramatic celebration. It was release. 2 lives had arrived safely, against prediction, against caution, and in that sterile hospital room, the contract that had once defined their marriage felt distant. When the nurse placed the first child in Caleb's arms, his expression shifted in a way Celine had never witnessed before. He positioned the baby carefully against his chest, adjusting his hold with deliberate precision. The second was placed gently in Celine's arms. Then, after brief monitoring, the nurse transferred both children so Caleb could hold them together. He hesitated for a moment. "Support the head," the nurse instructed softly. He nodded, absorbing every instruction. The twins were small, wrapped tightly in hospital blankets. Their movements were uncoordinated but strong. He stared down at them without speaking. For years he had trained himself not to expect this moment, not to dwell on possibility. Now possibility rested in his arms. Celine watched him closely. His jaw tightened slightly. His eyes filled again, though he did not look away. "I thought I would never do this," he whispered. She reached for his arm gently. "You are." He leaned forward carefully, pressing a soft kiss to each tiny forehead. Not triumphant, not boastful, grateful. In that moment, the wheelchair beneath him felt irrelevant. The medical reports felt distant. Identity had expanded beyond every limitation previously assigned. He was not a CEO holding children. He was a father. The weeks that followed were quiet. The penthouse shifted into new rhythm. Feeding schedules, sleep cycles, soft cries echoing through hallways once dominated by silence. Caleb reorganized his calendar without hesitation. Morning board calls were reduced. Travel minimized. Executive responsibilities delegated strategically. But the deeper transformation was internal. He no longer framed his life around what had been lost in the accident. He framed it around what remained and what had grown. Late at night, when the twins slept in their cribs, he would sit in the nursery with Celine and speak softly. "I used to think resilience meant accepting limitation," he admitted once. "And now?" she asked. "Now I think resilience means staying open to change." He did not romanticize their story. He did not describe it as destiny. He described it as expansion. Fatherhood did not repair his past. It reframed his perspective. He became more patient in meetings, more thoughtful in leadership decisions, more attentive to accessibility in infrastructure planning. Limitation had once narrowed his world. Now love widened it, and that widening altered how he moved through every room, corporate or domestic. Celine's foundation grew alongside their children. What began as a single pilot program in Chicago expanded into multiple districts within a year. Funding from Vail Foundation remained steady but discreet. Additional sponsors joined organically, drawn by measurable results. Student murals began appearing across underserved neighborhoods. Community centers requested workshops. Partnerships formed with regional school boards. Celine managed expansion carefully, applying the structural advice Caleb had offered early on. Heart first, she reminded herself, but spine always. By the twins' first birthday, the foundation had chapters in 5 states. News outlets covered the initiative more than her pregnancy now. Articles focused on access to creative education rather than speculation. One evening, Celine stood before a newly completed mural in a renovated school gymnasium. Students gathered proudly around their work. "This matters," she told Caleb later that night. "I know," he replied. "You built it." "No," she corrected gently. We built space for it. Their marriage had begun as transaction, but what it produced extended beyond personal survival. It created opportunity for others. And that, Celine realized, outlived any contract ever signed. On the anniversary of their wedding, they did not host an event. They sat on the balcony overlooking Lake Michigan while the twins slept inside. Do you remember what this began as? Celine asked quietly. A negotiation, Calum replied. She smiled faintly. And now? A partnership. There was no embellishment in his answer. They had never declared love dramatically. They had built it. Through respect, through boundaries, through choice. Celine thought back to the law office in downtown Chicago, where her hands had felt numb signing the contract. She had feared confinement. Instead, she had found expansion. I'm glad I met you as you were, she said softly. And I'm glad you didn't see me as incomplete, he replied. Silence followed, comfortable and grounded. Their marriage was no longer defined by rescue or arrangement. It was defined by daily showing up, and that distinction carried weight. Years later, their twins would hear the story not as spectacle, but as lesson. They would learn that their parents' marriage did not begin with fireworks. It began with pressure, with debt, with limitation, and yet, it grew. Not because of miracle alone, but because of dignity. Because one man refused to let physical loss define him. Because one woman chose respect over fear. Because both prioritized autonomy before affection. Love did not arrive loudly, it arrived steadily. And when two heartbeats appeared against all expectation, they were ready, not because they demanded it, but because they had built foundation first. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Someone who believes their future has already been decided. Because sometimes, the strongest foundations are built under pressure. And sometimes, what begins as contract becomes legacy. Their story proves one simple truth: limitation is not identity. Choice is.